looking around downtown area for some places. I want to put together kind of a list of places where people can watch the football game outside. And so I was thinking that the Fourth Avenue Food Park would be a spot, and I also went by Depot Park, but neither of them actually have TVs. I guess that's not. So I'm still out there searching. If you have any ideas, let me know.
I will. So yeah, your day's going well then?
Yeah, everything's going good. Yep.
Right.
I brought my dog in here to the office. I've got him asleep here at my feet.
Oh, what kind of dog is it?
That's nice.
What
Little
kind of
golden
dog?
doodle puppy.
Oh,
He's a
nice.
golden doodle puppy. Yeah.
Cute. Sorry, my connection's a little rough. But
That's all right.
anyway, so yeah, let's get started.
Okay.
So just like a quick primer question. Just go over like your career in general and just like any highlights you think that anybody should hear, you know?
Yeah. I grew up in Nashville and started working for a student newspaper in what was then called junior high school, now middle school, 7th grade. And yeah, the story that I remember is that I was on staff at the newspaper, and we had the story that we were ready to publish, saying that at the beginning of the school year, all the teachers had gotten together and said they weren't going to have any holiday parties at the Christmas season. And then several of the teachers had gone ahead and had parties. So we had this story together about how some teachers were, had broken the agreement.
Mhm.
And the principal spiked the story. And so then we wrote a story about how the principal had spiked the story. And then it ended up,
It
we all,
escalated.
right. And so it was kind of, that was my introduction to journalism, being able to kind of hold people to account. And that's, I think ever since then, I've pretty much almost without a break have worked on a student newspaper, and then professionally. I don't think I ever really planned on a career in journalism, at least through college. I was a religious studies major, but I worked on the student newspaper 3 out of the 4 years in college, and then graduated and hadn't really done much vocational thinking in college. And so I figured, well, here's something I know how to do. And so I got started working as a reporter. I worked as a reporter in a couple places in Tennessee, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and then Middle Tennessee at the paper in Franklin, and then up in Clarksville, where I started off as kind of worked my way up on the editing side.
Mhm.
In Clarksville, then I got a job in Tuscaloosa, Alabama in 2000. And I was there for 11 years when a tornado came through.
Oh gosh.
Pretty much destroyed a significant swath of the city. And you're probably too young to remember this, but in 2011, there were two big tornado events that wreaked destruction. One was in Gainesville, or in Tuscaloosa, and the other one was in Joplin, Missouri. The tornado in Tuscaloosa went on a path about 15 miles long and about a mile wide.
Mhm.
And that's where the University of Alabama is. And along that path, which kind of went along it would have been similar to going along in Gainesville. It would have been similar to going along like Archer Road, something like that. And it took out everything. It picked up all the trees were gone, for a mile wide swath. All the trees were gone. All of the street signs were gone. It picked up pavement. It destroyed houses. Pretty much everything for a 15-mile long, a mile wide. And so we sent reporters out into that, and it was just the beginning of reporting digitally. So we, after the tornado went through, thousands of people, maybe tens of thousands of people were displaced. There's a lot of the student housing was along there. And so we put up a Google spreadsheet where people could report on, hey, I'm okay, I'm staying on so-and-so's couch, or hey, I'm looking for my son or my girlfriend or whatever. And we had other things we did, like there were a bunch of rumors that were going around, and we had a reporter that was just assigned to looking around on social media for rumors and responding to those. In the end, we won the Pulitzer Prize for breaking news reporting.
Yeah, I saw. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
That was probably, that's the thing that'll be my obituary, probably, if they still have obituaries when I die. But
maybe we'll just start living forever and then never have.
Yeah, so those are kind of the career highlights. I came here in 2012. I'm now responsible for 3 newspapers: the Gainesville Sun, the Ocala Star-Banner, and the Leesburg Daily Commercial.
Yeah.
And my main job is being the person in charge of the newsrooms, but currently I'm also what they call market leader for those places. So I'm the top local executive.
Yeah. So you said you didn't even have a journalism degree. How did you manage to pitch yourself to, the first place you started working without, I don't know how much experience you had in between the paper you did in junior middle school and when you went into the workforce, but.
Yeah, certainly a middle school newspaper doesn't prepare you, but I worked on the Brown Daily Herald for 3 years, and that was a pretty rigorous newspaper. And then I interned at the Tennessean in Nashville after I graduated, and was there for about 9 months before getting my first professional job at the Oak Ridger. So, I think my sense is that while journalism school does a good job of preparing, a good journalism school like UF does a good job of preparing people for that first job, and could lead some people to go on to graduate school and do things that are more on the academic side. An undergraduate degree really is a vocational degree, and it's not really something that needs to be done necessarily in the classroom. I think the things that they impart are, it's maybe a little bit more condensed, maybe, but I was able to kind of pick those things up over time.
Yeah, and I've had my own issues with some of the curriculum. Sometimes I feel like we're not allowed to, do creative writing within the parameters of hard news, which is of course you're here for the fundamentals, but yeah. But speaking of that, do you ever see a piece of great writing that isn't your own and feel like, man, I wish I could have done that?
Yes, that happens a lot, and in fact, I think the toughest part, the thing, one of the problems in journalism, and it's probably true in a lot of industries, is that if you're good at doing one thing, you get promoted into something you don't know anything about at all. So I was a reporter, and I got promoted into being an editor. Well, they don't teach. Maybe they teach you about being an editor in journalism school, but that wasn't any on-the-job training I had, and so it took me a while to realize. And I was probably a terrible editor for that first job when I was in Franklin, because I would see somebody's story, and I would write it like it was my story. I would go through an edit. When I was editing the story, I would turn their story into my story. So I think one of the hardest things for an editor, most important things for an editor to learn, is to figure out how to preserve the writer's voice and respect what the writer is trying to convey, while at the same time trying to make that more clearer or more concise, or question the sources or question some of the assumptions, but not to try to go through and make someone else's story unrecognizable to them.
Yeah.
And so, that happens a lot where I see a piece of writing.
Yeah. And on the other hand, is there a story you're especially proud of, and what can, an up and coming journalist like me learn from it? I mean, I guess like besides the Pulitzer Prize, like one that you were in charge of.
I didn't quite understand.
Oh, do you have a story you're especially proud of outside of um, the sort of what was it again? The tornado one.
Yeah, well, when I was several, when I was a reporter in Oak Ridge, um, one day I was heading home, and there was a bunch of cars, like 100 cars, outside of a strip mall that I'd never seen before. And they're outside of a boxing. On the window was like, I forget, some boxing associate, youth boxing association. I thought, well, that's odd. And I went in, and everybody was playing bingo. And I'd never seen this before. There's a bus that was coming up, bringing like old folks from the old folks home into playing bingo. And there was a guy walking around with like an apron on, shoving money into his apron. I go, from all the bingo cards and things like that. I go, there's something here. And so I pulled started calling around. I tried to, what is this boxing association that's a parent front for a bingo operation? And at the time, bingo had recently been approved in Tennessee for operating, and the only people that could operate are charitable organizations. And so I tried to figure out what this boxing association was, and they had no history there. They had just, the lettering had just gone up on the window like in the last couple days before that. And so I sent off to the Secretary of State's office for the charter of the bingo operation. And a few days later, I got it and started calling the people who were on the charter. None of them knew anything about it. They didn't know why their name was there. They had never heard of this before. And so I went to my editor and I said, there's something significant that's going on here. I need to go to Nashville for about a few days and look into this. I pulled a couple other charters and found the same thing. Other bingo operations in East Tennessee that had recently been revived. They'd gone defunct, had been recently revived, and the people on the charter were just fictitious names or had no idea what was going on. And my editor said, it's not an Oak Ridge story. It's not a local story. We can't send you to Nashville for a week. Move on. And that's when I realized I needed to get out of there, and ended up quitting. But what turned out happening was I had written a couple stories about this, and the Tennessean in Nashville had read those and started looking into it. And what turns out was happening was that the Secretary of State in Tennessee was selling defunct charters to bingo operators so that they could run bingo, and pocketing the money. And it ended up being a huge scandal. The Secretary of State shot himself in the rotunda of the Capitol building, and bingo got shut down in Tennessee. And it's the story that got away. It's like I had the front end of that story, and it could have been my story, but
that's a crazy story.
That's kind of what led me out of Oak Ridge onto other things.
Yeah, the thing about bingo is like it's basically just gambling for old people.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a crazy story. What is like? You were talking about your challenges of getting sort of rejected by, your own paper for this great story. Like, what's like the biggest challenge you face in your career? Is it that, or like, what's the biggest challenge you face relatively often in addition to that?
We're at a better place now than we've been in this industry, I think, for the past 15 years. 2005, 2008 was the economic downturn that kind of ended the kind of the golden age of newspapers in a lot of ways. But even before then, for 5 or 10 years before that, at least 5 years, we had seen people's habits changing. And newspapers are trying to figure out, what are we going to do to get young people to read the newspaper? And so all kinds of different experiments were tried. Boca Raton, Florida, famously kind of redesigned their front page to make it much more graphical and splashy. None of the stories jumped off the front. The kinds of things we were covering and the way we were presenting them were all designed to get young people to read newspapers. And took us about 5 or 6 years to realize young people aren't going to read newspapers. It wasn't, so that wasn't going to be a winning strategy. What we had to be able to do is reach people on different platforms, on digital platforms or on multiple platforms. Needed to reach not just on our own platforms, but through social media, all these sorts of things. So there was this long period of experimentation, declining revenues, reporters weren't getting raises, journalists were getting laid off right and left. Everything was so disrupted that doing good work was possible, but increasingly difficult. And there didn't seem to be a winning strategy out there. Most of the people that really went out hard on trying to do something innovative got punished for it. It just didn't work out for them. When I was in Tuscaloosa when this was kind of going on, the New York Times New York Times owned the newspaper, and I could see the revenues declining by about 50% a year over about 4 years, and realized the New York Times was soon just going to turn off the lights. It wasn't running small dailies wasn't their DNA, and it's so for better or for worse, they ended up selling to another firm called Halifax, which turned out to be a saving grace. I don't think that the New York Times would have kept its newspapers open, but Halifax, thought had a different strategy about how to run small newspapers. They realized that the real estate that newspapers owned was more valuable than their operations. So they sold off the newspaper real estate and pocketed that or paid off debt and got themselves on a sustainable footing. Then we got acquired by Gatehouse and now more recently by Gannett. But I think now, finally, there's a sense of a path forward. And it's not going to be the same as it was, but it's sustainable, and it's there's an opportunity for newsrooms in particular to be much more central to the businesses, because it used to be during the advertising model that lasted through 2005 or 2008 that news was there in order to provide a medium for advertising sales. Now, most news organizations are, from the newspaper tradition, are much more subscription focused. So we're really looking at trying to build a subscriber base that is sustainable and puts the newsrooms in the driver's seat. What kinds of things? If you're looking for advertising online, nobody comes to our websites looking for advertising. But when you're selling advertising, what you want is audience size. So the impetus for news organizations is to produce things that will get people to click on a story. And those things tend to be crime, sensational stuff. But quality journalism isn't rewarded because it doesn't deliver big numbers typically. And so the subscription model kind of turns that on its head. Now, what's valuable are subscribers. And what do subscribers want? They want valuable journalism. They want journalism that they're willing to pay for. and people aren't willing to pay for clickbait. So it emphasizes the role of serious journalists doing serious work and getting supported by people willing to pay for that, which for me is a much more optimistic outlook moving forward.
Yeah, you were saying that it's hard now to create quality journalism that people will read, except from using a subscription model. For up and coming journalists, like what advice would you give to writing quality stories that people want to subscribe for?
I mean, some of it is just that. I mean, it's kind of old school enterprise, investigative, significant work. But I think the other thing is that young journalists need to be aware that they're going to have to be very entrepreneurial individually about how they do that, so that they build their own brand, which is not something that has been part of the tradition, the DNA of older school journalists. We tended to not to want to be the story. We wanted to kind of write the story and kind of hide behind. We weren't TV reporters who wanted to get out front of the camera. We were people who wanted maybe a byline on the story, but not necessarily to be personalities. That's going to be harder to sustain for, that's going to be a riskier proposition, I think, for a lot of people. There'll be fewer of those. I think the folks who will be more successful are going to be people who are comfortable on social media, getting their own, we still haven't reached a stability point in terms of what's the appropriate tone on social media, how much subjectivity is okay in how we report on things. I think there's a lot of debate that's still going on, experimentation across different platforms about that. So I think it's kind of feeling that out. And I think young folks as more digital natives are in a better position to be able to have that innate sense for where those things are shifting.
Do you feel like you've been able to adapt well to all the changes you've been discussing?
I think I have. I think one of the reasons for that is that a career in journalism prepares you to be able to look at different inputs and synthesize them and figure out what's going on here, which is why journalists who leave journalism, and that's been kind of the trend over the past 15 years or so, a lot of folks have done very well, typically, because it's kind of skills that make you a good journalist translate well into other fields. But for me, I've been fortunate, or at least I've chosen to, and haven't been forced out to stay in this area. But I've learned Python. I can do some scripting. I'm pretty adept at social media. I've just had to stay current on technology as well as trends in journalism.
Yeah. And what is it like having to jump from newsroom to newsroom, like as part of your regular schedule? And what differences do you notice in, like, even in the small area that you sort of have command over?
Yeah. I mean, some things are universal from community to community, but Gainesville and Alachua County are very different from Marion County and Ocala. This is kind of a bright blue spot in a red part of the state. It's a lot of professional and student populations. There's a fair number of middle income, upper middle income, and lower income folks in Alachua County. Marion County demographically is very different. It's one of the oldest counties population-wise. It's generally more conservative and Republican. And you have a wider disparity in income. You have billionaires that live in Marion County. We don't have any billionaires living in Alachua County, as far as I know. So you've got these fantastic horse farms and horses that sell for upwards of 7 figures and maybe even 8 figures. And then you've got people living, squatting on property out in the Ocala National Forest with almost nothing, or farmers who are scraping by, or the economic downturn in 2005 to 2008 hit Marion County harder than almost any place in the country because it was growing very quickly and had a lot of white collar jobs and a lot of building industry, focus of people who build windows and other parts for houses. All those things just kind of collapsed. And what's come in and replaced it are more call centers and distribution facilities that don't pay that well and aren't great career opportunities. So Ocala's coming around, but it's been a longer slog. Gainesville didn't really suffer as much through the Great Recession. Leesburg is much even more of a retirement community. That's kind of where the Villages is. And so it's for me, it's interesting to move from place to place. We've got folks in those newsrooms that really know their communities better than I do, but I try to keep up with it.
Yeah. So let me see. Yeah. How do you run all these different newsrooms though? Is it ever really tough to go back and forth, or describe your working relationship with the people that you've met?
Sure. For the past, since the start of COVID, we've kind of closed down our offices, at least to the public, and fewer reporters and photographers are kind of working dispersed. That's kind of how it's been for me. Working as editor of these other papers, I was kind of working remotely in some regards already. So we were doing it more by telephone. I'd go down to Ocala a couple times a week, get down to Leesburg, less than that. But there's a managing editor in Ocala, Jim Ross, who runs the day-to-day. And there's a community editor in Leesburg, Katie Sartoris, who, makes sure that the important things are getting covered in those communities. And so, I'm here more just to support, help them with hiring, consult with them on questions that come up. But really on the day-to-day, I'm much more engaged with the Gainesville day-to-day than I am with the Ocala or the Leesburg day-to-day. We have a couple daily meetings where we talk about stories, but for the most part, those things are in their hands in between.
What inspires you to keep going at this, time after time, any, just whether it's an event in your life, a person, more abstract concept, etc.?
Some of it's practical. It's the only thing I know how to do. I don't think anyone else is gonna, I probably could reinvent myself again, but it's a little bit late. I'm 61, so I think I'll probably finish my career out here either on my own terms or not. But it'll probably be in this range. But also, so that's the very practical thing. But I don't think there's been a time when journalism has been more important to our society. So there is that high calling that my father was a minister, so I've always had kind of a sense of calling, and so I've always felt my calling was here, and that it's something that really is a noble, necessary profession, activity. It's something that, and it's a chance to help shape and form and be part of the future, both in terms of the big picture, in terms of keeping the lights on and all that, but also hiring and working with young reporters, young journalists to get them on a footing where they can carry it on.
Yeah, definitely. I totally vibe with that. So yeah, that's pretty much all I got, unless you have something you feel like I should know, but
You know, the only other thing, and I tend to tell this sometimes when I talk to students or classes, if I was 40 years old, I might think about doing something different.
Hmm.
I think that while things are stabilizing now, um, I think that the future belongs to a different kind of journalist, a different set of skills, the digital natives.
yeah,
But if I'm 25, you know, you get to make the future. You know, it's an exciting time. It's things are much more in your hands. It's while there will be a corporate culture, and there will be corporate directives and all that kind of stuff. It's really the things that's going to shape it are going to be the young people. And I think it's an exciting time.
yeah. That's great. I love that. So my computer's about to die, but thank you so
Yeah.
much. I
Sure.
really appreciate this.
Yeah.